Welcome, NCFA fans, to our weekly podcast. This week we are covering the 2022 Conference Championship week and also giving you a preview of our fall 2022 NCFA playoffs. Let's jump right into it, shall we? We're going to cover what happened in each of these conference championships games, starting with number 3 Sacred Heart versus George Mason, ranked 4 or 5. They were tied with Michigan State. Michigan State, according to power rankings, was 4 because of the coaches poll. But we've got Sacred Heart 45, George Mason 14. Dave, what's your reaction to this game?
We expected this game to probably go in Sacred Heart's favor as the home team, but I don't think either of us expected this to be as lopsided as it ended up being. So Sacred Heart has played some close games, had an undefeated season thus far, but very close games. A close game against Mason the first time they played them. Close game against Coppin State, who Mason beat to make the conference championship game. We didn't expect a 45-14 game. Looking at the stats, Mason had some turnovers, 3 interceptions. That hurts. And then they had, I think, a total of like 13 yards rushing as a team. So obviously had some issues running the football. And then when they went back to throw it, had some interception problems. So that's 3 possessions they gave away, and they got points in those 3 possessions. They're right in this ball game. So I think that's probably the tail of it is the 3 turnovers or 3 interceptions. But shout out to Sacred Heart for their 5th North Atlantic Conference championship in a row, and they're happy to have the playoffs back this year because they booked their ticket without having to worry about any algorithms or anything of those lines.
Right, and I think that no team in NCFA history has ever won 6 in a row. So Sacred Heart's kind of one step away from doing that. I think that there's a lot of parity in the NCFA, meaning a lot of teams are evenly matched. I believe, like to your point, Dave, we went into this week thinking that these were evenly matched teams. Mason removed all doubt, beating Coppin State. It was a bit closer last time they played Sacred Heart, but we've been saying all season long that the road to the North Atlantic goes through Sacred Heart. So they lived up to that expectation this entire season. And even though these teams might have been evenly matched on paper in the track record, this is just an example of how bad things can go for you. Either if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or a team fails to make adjustments, or maybe you just didn't play your best football. I always tell folks there's 2 ways you can lose a football game. 1, because you're not good enough, and 2, because you made mistakes, or you made more mistakes than the other team. And this could be a result of one of those 2 things. I don't think that George Mason wasn't good enough to beat Sacred Heart. I think that mistakes were made, and Sacred Heart must have capitalized on a lot of those mistakes in order to only allow 14 points.
Yeah, most definitely. And we saw Mason with a really resounding win in their last regular season game over Coppin. Coppin and Sacred Heart played. That was an 8-point game, going Sacred Heart's way. So when Mason went out and was up 35-0 at halftime over Coppin, that ended up being the final score because they pulled all their starters in the second half. They're up 35-0 on Coppin. We're going, okay, Sacred Heart only beat them by 8. Coppin just beat them by 35. Mason might win this game, and then here's what happens. 45-14. I think it's a great point that I don't think either of the teams that lost big this week are maybe that much different than the teams that beat them. On that day, though, last Saturday, Sacred Heart played really, really good football, and we don't have a lot of film of this game or anything, so you see the interceptions and you instantly blame the quarterback, but you don't know if there was some injuries or the offensive line, or maybe Sacred Heart made some fantastic plays. So it's not all on Mason as maybe unforced errors or missed assignments or anything. Could be Sacred Heart came to play. They had the home field advantage. Traveling at our level isn't as it is at some other levels, so that's always a caveat that sometimes benefits the home team more than maybe in other leagues. But for Sacred Heart to come out and get that big win for them, I think it's kind of, we talked about this last week with them. They get a lot of forfeits. Teams don't want to play them in their area. It just takes them a little bit to get rolling. And I think they might have hit their stride at the right spot at this point in the season.
We're going to move on to the next game. This is the Great Lakes Conference Championship. Number one, undefeated Ohio State, putting up 59, which is kind of their average, against number four Michigan State, scoring 21 points.
Yeah, again, it's kind of insane that we see Ohio State put up 59 in a conference championship game, and nobody blinks, nobody wants to see what happened. They're just like, oh yeah, Ohio State, they're going to score 50 every single time they play. If they don't score 50 in the next couple of weeks, that's going to be weird for us to see, because this is, I don't know how many games in a row over 50 points, which is insane. I mean, looking at the statistics, I saw no film of this game as well, but looking at the statistics, it just looked like Ohio State kind of controlled the line of scrimmage. Is really what it seems like. They ran for 242 yards on offense. And that was really between two guys, their tailback and then their quarterback both had over 100 yards rushing. So, I think Ohio State is probably pretty good up front on the offensive and defensive lines. And Michigan State, had a few turnovers as well. Looked like they had some interceptions. Jack Donovan did throw for over 300 yards. So he might be, the best quarterback in the league. He's in that discussion for sure. But you cannot afford to have any turnovers against Ohio State. You have to force some turnovers to beat a team like Ohio State. And again,
Mhm.
it looks like Ohio State, the old playoff adage has been around for football since they weren't even throwing it, was in the playoffs, you got to play good defense. You have to run the football and you have to not have any turnovers. And in these first two games we're talking about here, the winners ran the football well, played good defense, and won the turnover battle.
The other thing that you kind of see in the personalities of these teams historically, if you know of these teams, you've got Ohio State trying to stay where they're at and perform at the level that they've historically, the last two seasons, have been known to perform at. But then you've got teams like Michigan State who are trying to reach and play above or play to the talent that they know they have, but haven't quite shown the country yet. And something has to break, whether they're striving to achieve or overachieve and exceed expectations, versus a team that's trying to preserve their current reputations and stay at the top. So there's the number one looking down, and then there's everybody else looking up, and the cards fall where they do, and you get a game like this where even though Michigan State lost, this is a huge step for their program, to be in this game and to play at that caliber, this kind of stage, and you can expect that they'll be coming back next year better prepared.
Yeah, most definitely impressed by what Michigan State has put together this season for sure. We'll get into how the Final Four played out, but there was really five serious teams in that discussion, and Michigan State was one of those five.
This is the last conference championship game. There were only 3 trophies to be had last weekend. This final one is the South Atlantic Conference Championship. We had number 2 Gordon State beating Columbus 20-12. Columbus showed flashes of greatness throughout the season. Gordon State was always itching at that number 1 spot, and I don't think that they got it even in the midst of first place votes throughout the season. This was the squeaker of all of them.
Yeah, and this is a game we talked about. We weren't trying to knock Columbus, but per the power rankings, they were the lowest ranked power ranked team in a conference championship game, and then they came out and nearly won this one. And the closest score we had was their 20-12 loss here. These are pretty big rivals. Columbus State has beaten them in the conference championship game in years past, and Gordon State came back and beat them last year and didn't make the playoffs. So there's no love lost between these two teams. From what I hear, it was a little chippy on the field. High energy, high level competition sometimes breeds a little bit of chippiness. But what Coach Spate does with the Columbus State program is, they do things 100% by the book. They're on the straight and narrow. They really do a nice job down there, and they play tough football. Gordon State has been receiving first place votes for a while, and I think the crazy part about Gordon State is anybody who plays Gordon State, which is talk to Mike Spade after the game, talk to the guys at Central Georgia. They can't imagine another NCFA team better than Gordon State. That's how good a football they've been playing. So this is by far their closest victory of the year for Gordon State, and a couple bounces go the other way for Columbus, and they're sneaking into the playoffs by beating Gordon. So really great game here. It was another Saturday. Our Ohio State Michigan game was a Sunday afternoon game, but Really impressed by what Columbus was able to put together and nearly get the W here over a higher ranked favorite opponent.
And this is another instance of when you're the second best team in the nation and you want to be the first, you can play other teams and maybe not play your best football and still win a conference championship. I bet you they are very unhappy that they only scored 20 points, but a W is a W and they're in the playoffs. This is definitely a case where they're used to putting up a ton of points, but they still got away with the win because they are who they are. They're the second best team right now in the nation, and they proved that by not playing up to their potential, but still winning a conference championship.
Yeah, most definitely. I venture to guess. I talked to Coach Atkins a little bit, and they didn't play their best football. They didn't feel like that. Looks like they did. Columbus State did some different things defensively and kind of got them out of their rhythm in the pass game. I think they had a couple of turnovers throwing the ball. Neil Howard, I didn't have his best day passing, but they ran the ball really well. Gordon State had 199 yards rushing as a team, 6 or 7 guys contributing to that. So that's really what won in the game was again playing good defense, holding Columbus to 12, running the ball really well, and winning the turnover battle. And that's sometimes gets overlooked in this new era of football of throw the ball over the field and what football is right now. But if you look back at the teams that win Super Bowls, the teams that win college national championships, the teams that win NCFA championships in the playoffs, run the ball, play great defense, and don't turn it over.
All right, so I'm going to quit out of this right now and go to another program. I'll edit this out.
I know you will.
Let's see here. Actually, and now we have the playoffs. So, conference championships, that's old news now. We've crowned 3 conference champions: Ohio State, Sacred Heart, Gordon State, and we are putting them into a playoff bracket. So if you've been following the NCFA, we're going to be having the playoffs this Saturday, November 19th, and there's going to be a conference champion versus a wild card. That'll be the first game, and then there'll be 2 conference champions going head-to-head in the second game. So let's take a look and see what those matchups look like. So here is an illustration of what that national championship trophy looks like. And to scale, those conference champions, those little Lombardis, are a little bit smaller in stature, but everybody wants what's in the middle here. And to start it off, we're going to have the wild card game, which is George Mason versus Ohio State.
Yeah, that's that rematch of last year's. And I guess let's get into, I mean, if you don't know the process of how the wild card was selected, it's based off the power rankings. If you go back and watch the selection show that was placed on broadcast on Monday in Suite 301, the NCFA spread it all around social media. Sandy Sanderson does a great job of explaining how Mason got in over Michigan State and how the other teams, Toledo, Columbus, kind of fell behind and the reasons for it. So if you haven't watched that, I would recommend watching that. And then some of the conspiracy theories about Mason getting in because we're playing the games there will leave your mind. Okay, it had nothing to do with it. But in this day and age,
I saw a comment that said, I smell bribery, and I was thinking to myself, I'd love to see the money.
yeah, that's what I told Sandy. Hey, send me some of that money that they got.
Yeah.
Come on, hey, we do this for nothing. But that had really nothing to do with it. So what it worked out was, last week they were tied, and it's all as the algorithms in there. Sandy has the whole spreadsheet, shares a screen, shows it. They were tied going into conference championship week, Mason and Michigan State. Michigan State was placed in the 4th seed because after a tie, when they have the same power ranking number, it goes to coaches poll. Michigan State was ahead in coaches poll. Michigan State was still ahead in coaches poll after the conference championship game. But Michigan State only had one loss at the time when they were tied. Obviously, Mason also only had one loss, but the way it worked out, Mason got a small little bump over Michigan State, and there's a couple of ways Michigan State could have got it, and the one that was the most glaring was Columbus kind of took a tumble, which is crazy because they had the closest game, but when people started voting, Columbus ended up finishing 6th. Had they finished 5th, they might have finished 7th actually. If they had gone up one spot more, Michigan State might have been in that 4th seed based on all the formulas. But we have rematch of last year's national championship game, Ohio State, George Mason. Mason's happy to sneak into the wild card after losing their only 2 games to an undefeated NCFA team in Sacred Heart. Otherwise, they won every game they played. I think if you ranked conferences, you'd probably say the Great Lakes is the highest, best conference in the league this year. If you just look at power rankings, the amount of Great Lakes teams in the top 10 is greater than any other conference right now, I think. So, there's some weight to stand on that. Ohio State's coming out of the toughest conference, maybe played the toughest schedule. But Mason is looking for some rematch off of last year. We'll get to picks at some point. I've been going on this for weeks. You will never see me pick against Ohio State this season. I don't care who they're playing, but I think Mason has, because of where we're playing at Mason. Again, we sent out messages to every single team in the NCFA. Only 2 teams even replied that they had a remote option, which was Mason and Toledo. Didn't work out with Toledo. Plus, Toledo's not really located kind of in the central area where we'd want anyways, but it didn't work out. So really our only option was Mason, or we host at a different facility, which we've done in the past. So once again, every team, Michigan State had the opportunity to say, hey, we'll host it, as did any other team. But so Mason does get that advantage of playing at home, which is, something nice for them to have. And that's a little bit of a home field advantage, but I still don't think that's going to be enough. Ohio State's going to come in wire to wire number 1, just blew somebody out in their conference championship game. It's going to come down to turnovers probably in that aspect, but I think it's a really exciting game. I think it's a really interesting matchup, getting the rematch from last year's national championship.
Yeah, that's going to be the storyline, the replay of the national championship. If you look at Mason getting blown out by Sacred Heart last week, that doesn't bode well for playing the best team in the nation the next week. Sacred Heart was consistently number 3 throughout the season. Gordon State consistently number 2, Sacred Heart consistently number 1. George Mason made a climb, and they lost to Sacred Heart twice. George Mason, unless they can really step it up, is living on borrowed time. I would have said the same if it was Michigan State in that slot. I would have said the same if it was Columbus State in that slot. I would say that if it was Toledo. So wild card, that's the spot where people were praying to get in. And those prayers for Mason were answered. But it's going to take a heck of a lot more than prayers to beat Ohio State. So
yeah, they're gonna have to be playing their best football of the year. They're gonna have to play their best game they've played all year, and then some. They're gonna have to force some turnovers. The one thing I think that Mason has going to their advantage to play Ohio State, which may be different than what Ohio State's seen, is their athleticism along the defensive line, especially with Gabriel Gibson. If they can start creating some havoc there and getting Barrington out of his rhythm, maybe be able to have somebody spy him along that D line so he can't get running like crazy, they may have a chance to keep the game close and then anything happens. I think that's going to be the one difference. I don't think Ohio State in an NCFA game this year has seen the kind of athletes they'll see probably on all 3 of these teams, but they'll see this week with Mason along the defensive line.
Yeah, I like what you said about Columbus State throwing Gordon State off their rhythm and keeping that score nice and low. George Mason might want to call Columbus and ask them what they did against Gordon, because if they can use some of that against Ohio State, it would help. Having that defense get off the field after 3 downs is going to be important. But once Ohio State gets that big playability or controls the clock with the offense, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, that's the thing that Ohio State's had going for them. They just get people out of their game plans really, really fast because they score early, they score often. Next thing you know, you blink and it's 28-0 or 28-7. And then your whole game plan you worked on all week goes out the window because you're got to play catch up. Now I have to get some quick scores. I might have to onside kick in the first half or right to start the second half. And I got to do some more creative things on defense to try to create some turnovers. And maybe I'm exposing myself for some more big plays if I don't create those turnovers. So the key will be for George Mason to start fast and try to disrupt them with that defensive line.
So on the other side of the bracket, we've got number 2 Gordon State. They want to be number 1 so bad, and they're going to have to win this game in order to prove it in the national championship if they're truly number 1. But we've got Sacred Heart, number 3, standing in their way, and they've played some statement games this season too. So this is going to be a great matchup.
Yeah, and I think this is the game that really intrigues me the most out of these two. I think they're both be really good football games to watch. But Gordon State is your typical kind of SEC type of team, athletes all over the field, fast speed guys all over the field. They don't necessarily have really large guys. They're not a pounding the football team, even though they ran the ball pretty well against Columbus. And then you have Sacred Heart. What do we know Sacred Heart to be? Pound the football, complete 80% of their passes off of play action from pounding the football, and play super tough, hard-nosed defense. Like that's your prototypical Northeast of the country football. So you're getting that Big Ten style or Big East style of football against an SEC style, and we'll see what happens out of those two. I mean, Gordon State is the only other team that's collected first place votes from in the top 10 poll. So we will see if they can honor that and try to give their chance to prove they're the best team in the country. But Sacred Heart, I just am a big fan of what they do. Been a big fan for a long time of what Coach Jones and his staff does over there, and what their players do. They have tough football players, man. And at the end of the day, I like to go to bat with a team full of tough guys, regardless of maybe if you're going to get out athleted a little bit by what Gordon State puts on the field.
Right. Well, and especially when you've got a playoff coming up and that your coaches have been in the dance before and have come out on top. You've got Ohio State. They know what it's like to be in this position. They've done it before. And when you're a young player, if you're a freshman or sophomore and you've never done it, you look to your coaches for that mindset, for that preparation, or when to flip the switch. And Sacred Heart, Ohio State, they've got that going for them. Gordon State, they wanted to be in the dance last year. They're just hungry. So it's a different dynamic. But they've won a conference championship. So now they've got a big game under their belts. But both Sacred Heart and Ohio State have national championship coaches. And that's going to be an advantage to both of those teams going into these games.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, Ohio State has some players that were on last year's team. Sacred Heart's guys from when they're tight are long graduated, I'm sure. But having that coach experience is huge. But for Gordon State's sake, like this is kind of in their head all season. The season was a formality to get to where they are now, because they were very upset they were on the outside looking in last year. They felt if they had this opportunity last year, they could have proved. They feel they were the best team in the league last year. So for them, this is kind of like their first circle date. I think they felt like they'd walk through the South Atlantic, which they did till the conference title game. They had a little bit of a scare there, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if that whole team was overlooking Columbus. We already beat them by 30. We got to worry about who we're going to play in the playoffs, and almost lost one. So again, with a lot of these teams, Ohio State obviously been running on all cylinders with what Coach Greg has got going over there, and I'm sure having the senior leadership at the quarterback position helps too. But Gordon State's a young team. It doesn't surprise me that they slipped a little bit in the conference championship. Looking forward to this game, but I think they'll be ready to play on Saturday.
There's no doubt that we're looking at 4 teams right now that truly believe they're the best team in the entire country. And they just need an opportunity to prove it. You've got Gordon State wanting to be number 1 all season. You've got Sacred Heart almost being a little bit slighted because of the amount of forfeits that they've got. And they're just like, we just want to play football. Yeah, we think we're the best in the nation, but man, give us some football games. So you really can't fault them for that. But again, they're number 3. They think they should be number 1 too. But, there's the old Ric Flair saying, to be the best, you got to beat the best.
Yeah, to be the man, you got to beat the man, right? Yeah. I do think, looking at these 4 teams, though, I think each team has something. If you look at Ohio State as number 1, everybody else is 1, gets to their spot. 2-time defending champs, coast-to-coast number 1 so far in the rankings. Mason with their defensive line and the athletic ability there, could give them fits. Gordon State, with just the amount of athletes they could put on the field on both sides of the ball, could give Ohio State fits. And Sacred Heart, with that punchy in the mouth mentality and lunch pail mentality, could give Ohio State some fits. So I think each of those three teams, could beat Ohio State. It'll have to start with Mason's opportunity here, but if Ohio State wins, I think either Gordon or Sacred Heart can give them a run for their money. So I don't think this isn't some formality that Ohio State's just going to walk through their next two opponents and win the championship. I think we're going to have an opportunity to see some good games.
All right, so give me your predictions. I'm going to be very, very surprised if we don't see Ohio State versus Gordon State.
All right, so you're going Ohio State, Gordon State. I'm not picking against Ohio State. I don't care who they're playing until I have to see what happens this week. But they've just been playing such great football, organized, not turning the ball over, putting up a lot of points, playing good defense. I think Ohio State's going to win a game that might be their closest game of the season thus far. So I got them going to Waynesburg and trying to get their three-peat. But I like Sacred Heart over Gordon State. I like that Sacred Heart has some more seniors. Gordon State's a young team, so I think the majority of their best players will be back next year. I think they're going to be a good shot to be back in this role next year. But I like Coach Jones and his staff. Much of his staff was around when they won their championship, and I like a lot of the seniors they have there. So I'm going to go with that experience and that physicality to beat the possibly more athletic team, younger team with Coach Atkins has. And I'm going to take Sacred Heart Ohio State for my championship matchup.
That's a great argument.
But they're going to play it in the field, and we're going to see who wins. We're just a couple of yahoos who pick some games here or there. But
what do we know?
Yeah, it's gonna be an exciting couple games. I wish I could be there. I can't be out there. Scott Hoffman's going to be our NCFA, the North Atlantic Conference coordinator. Played in the league, has been doing stuff for us forever. He's going to be out there as the liaison. Paul Bizzano, the head of club sports over at Mason's, been phenomenal in setting this up. And there's going to be it's a charge admission, but there's going to be a concession stand. There's going to be all kinds of stuff happening. There's going to be good football and a really nice field. We'll see what the weather's like. I don't know. Good thing we're not playing this weekend as the storm moves from the west of the country all the way across to the east. But I think it's going to be a really awesome experience to have both those games all in one spot and play it on a really nice field on George Mason's campus. I love the idea of us playing it on an NCFA campus. I think going to a national title game at a different place is cool, and I get that. But I never really liked us, playing the playoffs at some high school or this college or some city park. I think it's really cool to have it on site at an NCFA team, just because you're going to get a little bit more of the atmosphere. This college football, like, you want that college football atmosphere. You're on a college campus, that a team that participates at our level. So I think that's really cool. Your dog thinks it's cool too, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, she's barking. One final area of housekeeping is that the nominations for All-Americans has just opened up. So would you like to give an update about that?
Yeah, let's talk through that a little bit. So we sent them out. I had stepped away from the league for a couple of years. So I haven't been involved in the process in a couple of years. So back at it. But for many years, I did that completely, ran that all in my role with that. So those went out, I think, on Tuesday. We're trying to get them back by next Tuesday. Get your nomination forms back. But some new stuff this year. In years past, we'd only allowed players that were nominated by their team, which is whoever's filling out, their coach or their team president who's filling out the form. This year, we're going to allow some spots for, if you feel like maybe a team in your conference, you're worried that they're not going to nominate, or you want to make sure that some player that you played against that really impressed you gets nominated. We're going to accept nominations for other players. Now, we're looking for you to nominate, 4 or 5 guys. We're not looking for you to nominate 5 guys from each team. If there was a handful of guys that you felt made a huge difference in the game you played, and you want to make sure they get recognition, to your point last year with the Max Brown thing, with Milwaukee, you thought he was great and he didn't get nominated or whatever. I'm not sure why he didn't make the team, because I wasn't doing that last year. But to give that kind of role, then we have some new individual awards. We've always done offensive and defensive player of the year. We've always done team president of the year and coach of the year. We added a freshman of the year, and we added an assistant coach of the year. As our staffs get bigger, we thought it would make it makes sense to highlight maybe an assistant coach that's playing really, really good football as well, or coaching really, really good football. So we added those, and we're letting you throw some names in the hat because we don't really know all the assistants. So if you got an assistant coach on your team that did a really great job, whether he's a coordinator or whether he's the quarterback coach or the DB's coach or the kicking coach or whatever he does, maybe he's your strength and conditioning coach, and that's the reason your team's playing so well. Throw his name on there. The other thing we're trying to do is saves us some time from trying to track down pictures, and B, maybe gets us a better picture than we could find floating around on the internet. When you send your nominations, send us some pictures of guys, or at least at minimum, make sure they put a picture into their NCFA page, their portal on the page that we can pull a decent picture. Ideally, a headshot would be great for a release like this. But we're trying to get a quick turnaround, get them back by next week. We have a meeting next Tuesday night with our little committee that picks these. It's very statistic driven. So, put your stats in, get those up, get those into the website. We pull the stats. I think Monday night, I'll pull all the stats into a spreadsheet. Anything you put in after Monday, I'm not going to use it for the committee meeting on Tuesday. Get your nomination forms in by Tuesday afternoon, and Tuesday night we're going to pick the team, and then we'll put it all together, put the press release together, and we'll kick off championship week on Monday the 28th by announcing the All-American team, and then we'll announce the award winners as we go through the week to just kind of keep something going into championship week. So check it out. It went out. If you haven't seen it, I put a post in the Facebook group too, but if you haven't seen it, your team coach or your president hasn't seen it, reach out to me ASAP.
I think this is going to be the first year where, because I nominate All-Americans for Oakland, but since I'm given that spreadsheet, I am going to minimize the number of Oakland players that I nominate for All-American unless they're a league leader in something. Like, you have to be able to sell to the league why that player deserves an All-American spot. And sometimes just playing every single game or, being like a team captain isn't enough. Especially when you look at the stats and you see the other guys that are ahead of you in those stat categories. I want to be the most efficient nominator as possible and make sure that the guys that really deserve it are the guys that I spend my time nominating for my team. But at the same time, if there's a player from another team that I think should get it, I might just be penciling their name and where what team they play for in there as a team that might have given my team fits during the season. But also offensive and defensive player of the year. I know historically I've nominated a guy from my own team, but that might be somebody from a different team this year. It's a level of respect, but it's also in order to keep this league legitimate and to recognize the guys that really deserve the recognition. A lot of us, we like to rally our own teams, and we're very proud of our players. And there are players that I love to death, and I think I feel really bad that they don't have quite the stats, I think, enough to get an All-American nod this year. And it's a bummer, but at the same time, I'm really happy for the guys that get All-Americans every year because they truly deserve it.
Yeah, let's just, as we wrap up, let's talk about that one thing. That's a great point you brought up. Like, if you could nominate anybody you want. You want to nominate your whole team? Cool. I don't care. Here's what I recommend to teams. We don't do like an honorable mention or anything. We have a first team and a second team and the positions for that, and that's all we have. If you want to nominate a bunch of guys and your team puts a post as, here's our All-American nominations, and kind of highlight guys that way, cool. But if you're nominating every starter in offense, every starter in defense, both your head coach and your top assistant, and you won like 3 games, something there is not jiving. Okay, so every person that's nominated requires us to do our due diligence, make sure we have their stats, talk about them. This panel call can last for hours in some years if we have a lot of guys. So really take, to your point, feel free to nominate anybody you want to nominate. I would, if I was running a team, highlight the guys I nominated. Maybe after the fact, if they don't get made to the team, hey, these were our other guys that we nominated. Give them their due. But you really want to look at guys that you think could go in and start on any single team in this league and be a difference maker in every single team in this league. It's the All-Americans, the top players in the league. We want to make sure those are the guys that we recognize. And like I said, nominate some guys. If he's a great guy, he's got a great, he does great community service and he's a pretty good player, feel free to nominate him. and put some kind of post if he doesn't make the team about how he was nominated and given his recognition that way. But inevitably we'll post a team, and there'll be some people that are unhappy. But there's only so many spots that we have. We're not going to have a laundry list of first team, second team, third team, fourth team, honorable mention, and next thing you know, we got 2/3 of the roster getting that kind of recognition. So the guys that do make it, it's a special thing. It's a really awesome thing, and I hope I know Oakland in the past has done plaques and things. I've seen on some of your social media. You guys go out and get awards. We're not a big enough league to ship out an award for that, but I think it can be something really cool for teams to use to recognize guys.
Right, and this is a club college football league with student athletes, and one of the more recent rule changes that was a huge improvement to the league was the addition, and this of course is separate from NCFA All-Americans, is what we're calling academic All-Americans. And in previous years, you had to nominate All-Americans who had a 3.0 or above, and there would be a first team, second team academic All-American. But this was only your players that earned a 3.0 GPA or above, and those were juried into an additional academic All-American category. Well, that is not what we're talking about right now. We're just talking about regular, statistical All-Americans. However, if you're a player in the NCFA and you're watching this, get good grades. Make sure that you're going to class and doing the homework. College isn't that hard, is it? All you got to do is you just got to do the work, and you end up learning. If you end this semester with a 3.0 or above, with this new rule change, now you are automatically given academic All-American honors. However, in order to earn those honors, you don't just need the grades. You need your team representative to list you as an academic All-American and prove based on your academic records. And instructions for this are forthcoming. But if you get good grades and your team nominates you in the correct process, you'll automatically be given academic All-American honors, and that's a big deal too.
Yeah, that'll come out. We have to wait for the semester to end to see where the grades end up. So we're still maintaining that. We're still sticking to anybody who qualifies gets on the team, as we changed that last year. So that will come out, after the semester, after the championship game, a couple weeks after that, we'll get those nomination forms out. And to your point, the same process. You got to nominate a guy, but then you got to send in, for lack of a better term, the proof that you did have the 3.0 GPA. So we don't just, throw anybody on there. That's coming out as well. And we'll have more into what happens in the offseason of the NCFA, maybe in our wrap-up show after the championship game. But I think we're due for some really good football this weekend over at George Mason University, and we're going to see two good teams come out of there and get ready to play themselves to see who can be the true number one team in the league.
Season's winding down, but stay on board because these are some of the most exciting weeks in football the entire season. So watch for the next podcast that'll come out next week, which will discuss the winners of the brackets from this week, and we'll discuss the national championship matchup. So stay on board with us and keep your eyes and ears peeled for what happens this weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.